Is that really behind it? Big food changed the way we eat, and we were just conditioned to like the food, or did they really work on making us love this and get addicted to it?
So it's so interesting. At first, I thought I was researching two quite different topics. I thought I was researching why we got fat and what created the need for these drugs, and then how these drugs work, right? But it was weird. The same word kept coming up in both topics, in the research for both topics. And the word is not a word we use that often in everyday English, but everyone knows what it means, satiety. It's the feeling of having had enough, right? You're sated when you've had enough and you don't want any more. And there's a lot of scientific evidence that the food we eat is profoundly undermining our sense of satiety. It's undermining us ever getting that feeling of, I've had enough and I don't want any more. I'll explain why in a minute. And what these drugs do is they boost your satiety. Indeed, Carel LaRue, one of the scientists involved in developing them, described them to me as satiety hormones, right? What they do is they give you back your sense of satiety. I remember a couple of days after I started taking them, I think 2 days after, waking up and having this weird feeling, lying there and thinking, I feel really strange. What am I feeling? And I felt the kind of nausea, which is a common side effect, but it wasn't that. I knew what nausea was. And it took me like 5 minutes to realize, oh, I'm not hungry. I've woken up and I'm not hungry. I don't remember that ever happening before. And to understand why, I think we've got to go back to the question about this food, and it's important to understand how new this food is. 78% of the calories consumed by the average American child are ultra-processed foods. That means foods that are assembled in factories where nothing resembles a kind of food that my father would have eaten when he was a child, right? If you look at even a strawberry milkshake, the average strawberry milkshake you would buy, the strawberry flavoring alone contains 50 chemicals, none of which comes from a strawberry. So these are chemical constructions of things that sort of resemble things in nature, but are wholly chemically constructed. And what we know is that food affects our bodies, and particularly our ability to achieve satiety, very differently. And there's lots of reasons why that I go through in the book, but there's an experiment that really helped me to grasp this. I nickname it Cheesecake Park. That's not the official name of the experiment. So there's a brilliant neuroscientist called Professor Paul Kenny, who's from Ireland. And when he was in his 20s, I think to finish his PhD, he moved to San Diego. And he quickly noticed Americans don't eat like Irish people, right? They were eating much more processed food, much more sugars, fats, salts. And like a good immigrant, he quickly, assimilated. And within a year, he gained 30 pounds. And he was finding this food incredibly Moorish. And he was wondering, does this food in some way change your brain? What is it doing to us? So he designed an experiment to test it. It's a very kind of simple experiment. He raised a load of rats in a cage, and they had loads of access to pellets that were just made out of the whole foods they evolved to eat, right? The kind of stuff that rats ate for thousands of years. So they've got access to a lot of their natural food stuff. And when they've got their natural food stuff, the stuff they evolved to eat, even though they've got loads of it, they could eat it all day if they wanted to, they will eat enough and then they'll feel sated and they stop, right? So given their natural food stuff, the rats never became obese or even overweight. They just knew when to stop. They had a kind of natural nutritional wisdom. Then Professor Kenny introduced them to the American diet. He fried up some bacon, he bought some Snickers bars, and crucially, he bought a load of cheesecake. And the rats went crazy for it. They would dive into the cheesecake and literally eat their way out, and emerging just slicked with their whiskers, slicked with the cheesecake. And all the nutritional wisdom they had, the sense of knowing when to stop, literally disappeared. They just ate and ate and ate. And as Professor Kenny put it to me, within a couple of days, they were different animals, right? All sorts of medical indicators were starting to go wrong, and they were just rapidly becoming obese. They just, given this artificial food, they were completely incapable of getting sated signals and knowing when to stop. But then Professor Kenny did another twist on the experiment, one that as a former junk food addict, I feel was a bit cruel, actually. He took away the American diet, right? And he just gave them back the pellets they'd had. And he was pretty sure he knew what would happen. They would eat more of the pellets than they had before, and this would prove that, these drugs expand your appetite. That is not what happened. Deprived of the cheesecake, deprived of the Snickers and the fried bacon, they refused to eat anything at all. They just shunned their healthy diet that they'd had before. It was like they no longer recognized it as food at all. And they waited until they were almost starving before they started to eat it again, right? Now, I think you can see in that experiment what we have loads of human evidence for, which is, as Gerald Mand, who's a professor at Harvard, who designed the food label that's on all food that's sold in the United States by law, said to me, there is something about the food we're eating that is undermining our ability to know when to stop, right? It's absolutely crucial to understand that. And that, of course, clears the way for these drugs, right? As Michael Lowe, who's a brilliant expert on this at Drexel University in Philly, said to me, these drugs are an artificial solution to an artificial problem.